I think in the past, it was a lot more straightforward to sort of say, like, people would make money on altcoins, put that back into Bitcoin. These days, I think the way I see it is you've got two very different audiences buying Bitcoin versus like meme coins. On one side, you've got legitimate, businesses, regulated businesses buying Bitcoin ETFs, ultimately TradFi, that sort of thing. And then you've also got people YOLOing $200 into a coin that was created 10 seconds ago and pumped off FUD because they think that a guy on stream has locked himself in a cage. I don't think the people buying those are the same people.
Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. Welcome everybody into another episode of Coinage as we kick off the week. Happy Thanksgiving week to everybody. It's going to be a glorious time. Hopefully not a great Monday though, as it turns out, as we check out the charts right now with Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin just basically hanging in there right now at 95 is what we're looking at there. A little bit of a sell-off to contend with today. Even after we get a big boost from MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor, that has been the trend. But I think perhaps some people waking up to the idea of what's really going on there with his buys and perhaps some worries of leverage. But still a lot of time to go in 2024, and we're going to be chatting a little bit more in terms of what to expect as we wrap up the year. And of course, dig into our crypto project of the year as we take a look at the bracket and offer the chance for everyone to fill out a bracket. Today's the last day, and you can win a quarter of an ETH is up for grabs as we look at who's going to win our competition this year. Voting will open, actually, a little bit later in the week. So if you haven't yet, head to coinage.media to fill out a bracket for your chance to win a quarter of an ETH and split that among whoever gets it most right. Really fun last year. Excited to be bringing it back. But to start, let's recap where we're at on that chart, because it was a record week for inflows when it comes to crypto investment asset products. Crypto asset investment products? Crypto investment products. Let's just throw the CoinShares chart up here, Texas, and take a look at the actual numbers, because it was a record week for inflows into crypto asset investment vehicles, if you want to call it that, according to CoinShares. Looking at that, the number, as you see there, north of $3 billion in terms of total weekly inflows, 3.13 billion. That means year to date, you're looking at record inflows of 37 billion. Bitcoin, as it always is the case, amounting for the lion's share of that total, $3 billion in inflows. And maybe less interesting things beyond Bitcoin to note: Solana outpacing Ethereum last week with inflows of 16 million versus 2.8. And also interesting to think about maybe how Solana's ETF odds perhaps start to change as we look at 2025, given that you got the Trump admin coming in. So a lot of people getting excited about what could happen with Solana ETFs and those odds improving. But for now, it's all Bitcoin, and it's all Bitcoin all the time, mostly in large part, by the way, because of one man and one company that continues to gobble up all the Bitcoin in the world. I was watching it. A lot of people have noticed every time Michael Saylor is talking about maybe adding green charts or green dots to the chart of Saylor Tracker, that means on Monday he's going to be buying. That's basically how he's coordinated and basically told people. He's choreographed it. That's the word I'm looking for. I need some more coffee today. Where's my Dunkin'? Dunkin', our sponsor for today. No, he's been choreographing what's been happening, and this was his tweet this morning, basically revealing and announcing that MicroStrategy scooped up another $5.4 billion worth of Bitcoin, this time at an average price of $97,862. And now MicroStrategy has $21.9 billion worth of Bitcoin, acquired at an average price of $56,761. So when you consider all of that, obviously bullish buying. How bullish is a very good question, because our friends at Fundstrat have been compiling the data looking at exactly how much is MicroStrategy's purchases right now in relation to Bitcoin being purchased by the ETFs. And I think that that's always interesting, right? We just showed you the CoinShares chart looking at Bitcoin and how much is coming in there, record inflows. But then one man and one company basically accounting for the lion's share of what's been going on. Texas, I think we have this chart from Fundstrat. Shout out to Sean Farrell. looking at kind of what this looks like in terms of his buys versus ETF flows. And if you just look at last week, this is technically from, I think, the 11th of November to the 16th. And I mean, the blue, light blue is MicroStrategy's, and the orange there, the Bitcoin ETFs. And over this week, looking at it, actually flipped negative. So this is before this last record week we're talking about. But pretty wild to think about how those bars kind of look. I mean, the MicroStrategy purchases are larger than those weeks for inflows since they're negative for the ETF. So like the fact that these bars look this way just goes to show the amount of size, right? This is all the Bitcoin ETFs. This is anybody scooping up Bitcoin through ETFs around the world and one company buying Bitcoin. So, I mean, you look at those numbers and you just say, okay, MicroStrategy matters here. And I mention all that because, you know, it's reflexive, right? The higher, as we've been talking about, the more that MicroStrategy can raise money and buy more Bitcoin is great when it's moving in that direction. And if all things are working, that's great. But when it starts to flip, you do start to get a little bit worried. And I think that's why maybe perhaps right now we're seeing some downward move and pressure coming off. I mean, the upward momentum is starting to wane when it comes to the Sailor boost, at least in terms of, you know, what we've seen recently. And I think that's kind of expected, right? The market starts to get used to these buys. On the margin, that's just kind of how it goes. It's kind of the same thinking, weirdly, at the Fed. When it's like, when they choreograph everything so methodically and you know it's coming, it doesn't really surprise and impact the market as much as it maybe did before. So kind of weird to see that starting to wane. But people get addicted to these things, you know? They got addicted to quantitative easing with the Fed. They get addicted to Sailor's $5 billion worth of Bitcoin buys. But it's not just Sailor. I should shout out the fact that we've also got Semler Scientific basically following the same playbook as MicroStrategy, which I think is very interesting as well. Sailor is essentially now grooming, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but grooming other CEOs and other companies to copy his playbook of smartly, or at least as he says, you know, creating leverage and buying up Bitcoin in a smart way. And if you look at the statement, right, this tweet from Eric Semler, it's basically worded the same way as MicroStrategy often words theirs, and Michael Saylor often words his. So very interesting to see kind of how closely aligned this kind of buying is. And the hope is you go from one company doing to two, and then more people see that and want to copy the same playbook. So very interesting to see. Obviously way less in terms of the amount purchased here. Semler only scooping up another 297 Bitcoin, so that's 21 or 29.1 million, at a much higher average price, by the way. But still, they've averaged into Bitcoin at 75K. So interesting, just a flag in terms of how many companies perhaps could follow. At the very least, Michael Saylor has convinced one other company to do exactly what he's doing. So we'll see what happens there. But for now, Bitcoin not at 100K. My bet is, by the way, Texas, our good producer over here, if you were to ask me, I would say that we don't hit it until after Thanksgiving. That's my thought, right? Because, I don't know, technically it was based on the idea of seeing moves higher today. Not the case as people are digesting this latest Saylor buy. So, you know, we'll see what happens. But my gut still says post-Thanksgiving bump. I'm not buying the idea that we hit it before, but we'll see what happens. Could be wrong. Rarely am I ever wrong, as you know. Moving on to the next topic that we have on our news recap show. Again, we do this every Monday, so if you're just tuning in for the first time, go ahead and give us a follow. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and like the video and subscribe as well. But the other thing that we're watching is in DC, and very interesting to see kind of some of the infighting and the way that it's shaking out in the Trump transition team. The guy who's been co-chairing that transition team, Howard Lutnick, CEO at Cantor Fitzgerald, billionaire on Wall Street, very powerful man. Also now very closely linked with Tether, as they've been basically running their assets in custody for quite some time, and Howard Lutnick has come out and defended Tether for a while. And now the Wall Street Journal out with a report that was looking at how that relationship has been shaping up, how Lutnick has been doubling down on it. Very interesting to unpack. One of the things that hadn't been reported before is that Cantor is basically working through, or has already worked through, having about a 5% ownership interest in Tether. That hadn't been previously reported. Very interesting to consider that. talking about $600 million stake in Tether. Very interesting, just given the fact that Lutnick has locked up the position of Commerce Secretary and basically has been the only one saying, look, Tether has the goods. They've got the money that they say they do. And obviously that impacts and benefits Cantor Fitzgerald because they're making, I believe, according to this article, tens of millions of dollars just for helping Tether custody U.S. treasuries to back the largest stablecoin by market cap. And so interesting to think about that relationship, how it might shape up, how it might change, and what that means for Tether potentially writing the rules for stablecoins under a Trump administration if Howard Lutnick has so much to gain. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting. And it's kind of being openly debated whether or not that's a good thing or bad thing. And of course, as we pointed out before on Coinage, very weird to hear Howard Lutnick speaking at the Bitcoin conference talking about how good Tether's gotten at really permissioning things and preventing terrorists and criminals from using Tether at a conference that's about Bitcoin and permissionless money. I think it confused a lot of people and now is raising some more red flags when it comes to what exactly is Howard Lutnick and Team Tether trying to do here. Just as a reminder, take a listen to what he said down in Nashville just a few months ago.
So I want to be unequivocal, okay? Tether does what it says it does. It has one-to-one. It's onboarded with 150 law enforcement agencies around the world. Why do I know that? Because when we formed our relationship with them, we helped them onboard those institutions. We helped them do it. As you all know, every transaction on the blockchain is traceable, and Tether will seize any amount of coin that is involved in illicit activity. They will be caught. So whoever said things about Tether, they're knowingly false, they know it's wrong, and it needs to go away.
So that's the man who's now going to be leading, going to be in the role of Commerce Secretary, and a lot of people looking at that Tether relationship. And again, I think sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, and sometimes you just got to watch and see what happens. But I think a lot more people are paying attention to it, which is generally good. And a lot more debate on crypto Twitter about whether or not it will be beneficial for the industry or just for them, and something to watch moving forward. But I do want to shift. We're going to go out of order, I think, a little bit here in terms of where we go next, because myself, actually, I'm going to be going out to the Blocks conference in Prague. It's a very interesting time in crypto, obviously, and they got a lot of great guests going out for their conference in Prague coming up in December. Quite interesting to highlight today. Emergence, the name of the conference. There it is. That's the one. And excited to have on with us today, George Calais, the Block's head of research, joining Coinage. George, good to see you, man.
Awesome. Good to see you as well.
Yeah.
It was very informative to listen to your news highlights on a Monday morning.
Yeah, man, it's an exciting time, and obviously what you guys are doing over there, we do track a lot of y'all's reporting. We often profile it on Coinage as an aggregator of a lot of the best reporting in crypto, and you're over there more on the research side. And I think I'd be curious just to get your take, George, in terms of kind of as we wrap up 2024. You know, it's kind of wild what we've been seeing on-chain, off-chain, inflows, outflows, you name it. But what's top of mind for you as we kind of watch this all play out and people wait for 100K?
Totally. And you're having me on at a good time because we spent a lot of this month kind of thinking about what these key trends are going to be in 2025. We always put out a pretty comprehensive year in review recap report that should be being published in about a week. So got to give the shameless plug there. But, as we kind of look into the next year, I would sort of break it up into a few different groups. You mentioned on-chain, off-chain. I think another way that we're kind of thinking about things is in terms of market cycles. And, we had kind of over the peak of the last cycle and also the ensuing bear market, a lot of traction with institutions. And now we're actually seeing more engagement with sovereigns and even those institutions that were initially dipping their feet in the water, getting way more engaged. So kind of from like a more macro perspective, we're seeing a lot of positive tailwinds. You mentioned kind of I run a research team that has a large consulting piece to it. And a lot of our, fintech clients, financial institution clients have been asking us a lot more questions as they kind of think about what their market entries are going to look like, from building products that help their end clients or facilitating access to kind of investors they interact with who may be looking to kind of increase exposure to the asset class.
Yeah.
So a lot of interesting stuff happening there. And then on the on-chain side, I would say kind of our key focus is, over the past 2 years, I would say there's been a huge focus on scaling out our infrastructure as an industry, and almost to the extent where you kind of saw a little bit of fatigue, particularly as some of those projects launched tokens, and there was a lot of names out there, some with less positive price performance. But at the end of the day, I think we've seen both kind of on the Ethereum scaling roadmap side, a lot of improvements that have just lowered the cost of transactions.
Yeah.
We've seen users flock to Solana, due to its low cost of transaction. And so, what we think now, similar to kind of the invention of the smart contract platform, 9 years ago, leading to market cycles where you had a lot of innovation around DeFi apps, which, leveraged the technology, but in a way where sometimes those high transaction costs aren't quite as burdensome. Now we're kind of looking towards what are those new wave of applications that are going to benefit from smart contract platforms that actually have far more affordable cost of transactions. So
Yeah.
sort of saw a little bit of that over the past 6 months with Memecoin trading. But I think there are going to be a few more unlocks.
We
due
have
to
seen
that.
that. You're right. We have seen that with Memecoin trading, and it's been a very interesting thing to watch. And I want to bring in your editor-in-chief, the Block's editor-in-chief, Tim Copeland, making his first debut appearance here on Coinage as well. Tim, it's good to have you on, man. And I'd be curious to get your take, too, just building off what George said there in terms of the narratives you're watching to end the year, because there are so many things going on. It seems like, I mean, outside of the Bitcoin inflows and everything watching there, you guys are putting together, it's a who's who, basically, that's coming up at Emergence. It's exciting to kind of see this name and just throwing up one of your tweets here, kind of looking at who you have, including totally from Solana. It's been a great year for them. Tim, when you're kind of like covering this right now from a narratives perspective, I mean, George just mentioned meme coins, and we were talking Bitcoin inflows. What to you is kind of like the biggest storylines that you've been watching as a narrative goes to wrap up the year? I don't know if we have his audio there. I don't know if we got you. Let me see here. Hold on. Sorry. Want to make sure we can hear you.
No.
There you go. We got you now.
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, it's mostly either big Bitcoin or sort of, meme coins, and then sort of nothing in between. So on Bitcoin, you've got obviously the very institutional elements. You've got the ETFs, you've got MicroStrategy buying it. And then with sort of meme coins, you've got pumped up fund live streams as far as they're going right now. And you've got meme coins getting listed on Robinhood. They listed WIF today. Binance is listing like meme coins very quickly after they've been created, as all sorts of craziness. And then you've got this sort of gap, which I think Ethereum has sort of fallen into, where it's sort of between the two, hasn't quite managed to catch sort of either narrative, and has sort of become a little bit of a running joke narrative wise. So yeah, I think the main one sort of mostly being Bitcoin, and then also meme coins.
Yeah, it's been I don't know. It's been weird to watch kind of the blowback now on Pump.Fun over the weekend. A lot of people calling that out as maybe not so good. And I mean, George, just when you talk about kind of the momentum of the data pointing to these things, you could make the case that kind of meme coins are the second flow. Ethereum had its moment with NFTs. Now you've got Solana having its moment with meme coins. As we know, it didn't work out so well for NFTs. But you do want to show what's capable, what's possible on these networks. I mean, when it comes to the metrics and things like that, right now we're running our Crypto Project of the Year competition to really try and sense what people think is most interesting and most worthwhile to highlight. When it comes to what you've seen, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, you mentioned some parallels. Obviously it looked a lot like NFTs, just given that these are kind of like, they're not masquerading as technical projects. They're, purely kind of like social and mimetic in nature, like an NFT. But also even as parallels to where Ethereum sort of had its first run up around the ICO bubble. And so I think that there, the common threads in these is you have the nature of the game expanding beyond kind of the closed loop ecosystem of cryptocurrency investors and enthusiasts who are here for the technology and here to kind of like build out infrastructure and maybe invest around those categories. But now you have new people using this for ways that are sort of unexpected. And I think recently, like some that a lot of people would, find sort of even like repulsive or unattractive. But, I think Pumped Up Fun has broken into, the normie lexicon as meme coins have really grown. And you now even have like TikTok meme coins that just shows that conversations are happening in places that isn't, dominated by this crypto community that we so closely track. And then I would say kind of the other breakout success, which also had its fair share of criticism, but I would say probably much more unfounded criticism, was Polymarket and the emergence of election betting sites, with Polymarket actually capturing much more volume than its more regulated peers. And I think that called into question both. Obviously it was, a show of success of a crypto use case, but I think more importantly than that, I think it's one of the first times actually, where, there was a use case where, it's not only something that's useful for crypto, but it shows where applying, a public open information platform and, open applications actually provides more transparency, impacting things like journalism, kind of like corporate networks, which sometimes show biases, and I think that was a major win for the industry, even as we're sort of dealing with some slight turbulence in the public's perception of that platform. I think history will be on the side of kind of open transparency and more correct.
I think it was interesting to kind of see those odds play out publicly, and kind of the idea of the first major election cycle that had those prediction markets at play, and how journalists and how the public wanted to interpret that data and what it meant. But was pretty interesting, and partially why Polymarket is included as one of the favorites, I think, in our crypto project of the year, just because that narrative, as you said, George, did kind of onboard a lot of people in terms of realizing that, hey, crypto can be used this way. And so, we'll see how far Polymarket goes in that. But Tim, on the flip side, I mean, I guess, I was looking at some of your tweets, and I would fall in the same camp. I think a lot of people in crypto right now fall in the same camp of, hey, is this good that meme coins are kind of here and so egregious and so out there right now? Is this kind of like what we want to be representing the industry? But if it's onboarding people, it's onboarding people. So, I mean, I guess, for you, where do you sit on that in terms of how important that actually is?
I think meme coins have a really important part in onboarding many people to the crypto space. I think they're a lot of fun, and I think there's a lot more freedom that I think projects are finding with meme coins. The question is, can we do so sort of in a reasonably responsible way? And I feel like I think what's been interesting with Pump.fun recently is the crypto community is pretty thick-skinned. It's pretty willing to say things, share images or whatever that maybe regular people might be like, oh, you can't say or share that. But we sort of seem to have hit a limit with Pump.fun where people are going like, this is too far. Like, when sort of the most degenerate crypto people are saying that this needs to stop, like, there's definitely a few questions. So I think maybe we need to find like a right balance. I think also like the more crazy things get, the more excuses regulators have to come down with a hammer. I mean, you don't want to sort of like a return of Gary Gensler. We don't want to force our way towards that sort of situation. So I think we've got to find a balance. I think maybe some improvements to be made there.
Yeah, I mean, even to be fair, even Pump.fun and their leader there has addressed some of this, saying that they're working on moderation, and they at least added a toggle to hide not safe for work meme coins that are popping up too. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I do want to ask you, Tim, about what you got coming up with Emergence and the conference in Prague. As I said, a lot of big headliners, including Anatoly from Solana, Justin Sun, I believe, as well, and a few other huge power players. So I mean, it's basically the perfect time to have a conference to wrap up the year, being in December. What should people know about it? What are you excited to kind of glean from it? And I think, is this the first time the blog's putting on a conference this size?
That is correct. This is our first conference. Super excited about it. It's sort of been everything I've been focusing on recently. We've got a team of interns. They've been doing amazing work. We've just been like putting out memes. I mean, that's mostly what we've been doing, but also, selling tickets and everything else. I do think our lineup is great. I mean, the blog's been around a long time. We have amazing contacts in the industry. You can sort of see that by the people that are coming, CEOs of like major crypto companies. We got people from the biggest exchanges, from the biggest projects, and we got sort of a absolutely stacked lineup. We also have done a little bit of magic with the agenda. We've got some really interesting topics to discuss. Obviously, crypto meeting AI is a big one these days. So your classic narratives like deep in, that sort of thing. Straight up on the agenda, we've got one on Memecoins, with a few interesting people to chat about that. And then also a couple of interesting regulatory panels. So when I was sort of putting the agendas together, I was like, well, at the time we didn't know the outcome of the US election. Obviously we do now. And I think it'd be really interesting to discuss the impact of that. I mean, we've already seen a huge impact from the election. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun discussing like really what that means going ahead. And then all the other panels will be chatting about the sort of innovation and everything else that's happening in crypto. So yeah, super excited. We're seeing a lot of tickets coming in this week. And I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited to be out there moderating as well. So we'll see you out in Prague. It's going to be good times. And I guess, George, too, just kind of getting back to the idea of where we're at and all this and what you're seeing on the data front. I mean, when we look at things right now and this idea of waiting for 100K, it does seem like it's all MicroStrategy at this point. It does seem like it's like, I mean, we were showing the chart off the beginning of the show. Tex, I think we can bring that one back up. It's just the size of MicroStrategy's buys compared to some of these ETF flows is pretty wild. So, I mean, like, is that really just all this comes down to in the short term?
I mean, I think it's definitely, and they've been doing this for quite a while. They've been kind of a large buyer in the market, and I think that mixed in with kind of like retail being sort of excited about the potential performance of the underlying equity there, as has driven like a lot of narrative and excitement. But I think in general, like probably the larger story is you talk to I was recently at an event hosted by a crypto company that basically provides tools and services for wealth managers. And so there were, a lot of the big brokerage players there, but also, these networks of investment advisors that, aren't the big Wall Street names, but they're, manage offices, probably 50 offices, throughout the country. And you probably had representatives from about 75 of those firms there. And hearing them start going from, this is something we would never touch, to, we're going to demand the brokers we use to have access to crypto ETFs, because we're even thinking about proactively, advising our clients to have 1% of their net worth in Bitcoin. And I think that is probably, like, over the long term, a more forceful and also more durable set of buying pressure. So I think that is probably going to be like the unsung hero and story to watch. And then I think it's not to rule out things like sovereigns getting involved in actually buying, which I think seemed insane a year ago or 6 months ago, but is I would say is still pretty mind-boggling, but less crazy and less totally unlikely.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. I mean, it's been interesting to watch kind of the 180. I think, clearly a lot of people got caught flat-footed on that front in terms of what happened for crypto's big boost to wrap up the year. And Tim, I guess to put a button on it, right, when we talk about what that means for everything else, we haven't necessarily seen yet. I mean, maybe we've seen the start of it. This idea of a rotation beyond Bitcoin into everything else. And as I said, right now we're kind of letting our community, anyone with a Coinage NFT right now can vote, fill out a bracket, and choose who might win the bracket of Crypto Project of the Year. And it's really just a way to kind of get a pulse of where these narratives and which projects are gaining the most attention. You got all kinds of different things. We were just talking a little bit about Solana and Memecoins, that idea. You got Base and the idea of kind of consumer adoption. You got the idea of DPAN and Akash and what they're doing. I mean, Tim, what do you think is kind of catching steam as we await, and whether or not you agree, I guess, is another question, in terms of this eventual spillover into altcoins? Who's positioned best to kind of capture that wave?
I'm a bit surprised to sort of think of it that way. I think in the past, it was a lot more straightforward to sort of say, like, people would make money on altcoins, put that back into Bitcoin. It was all a lot more linear. These days, I think the way I see it is you've got two very different audiences buying Bitcoin versus like meme coins. Like, on one side, you've got legitimate, businesses, regulated businesses, funds, everything buying Bitcoin ETFs, and then also potentially like some of the Ethereum ETFs, ultimately TradFi, that sort of thing. And then you've also got people YOLOing $200 into a coin that was created 10 seconds ago on pump.fub because they think that, because the guy on stream has locked himself in a cage. I don't think the people buying those are the same people. Obviously there's, there is overlap, many people own both. A lot of, crypto GGM people own Bitcoin. But I do think, especially with this sort of Solana growth, you definitely see a lot of tweets of people who own like Solana and don't own Bitcoin or ETH. And I think that's just especially true for people that have sort of maybe come in through TikTok, through like some sort of TikTok coin, and then they buy that coin. Maybe they buy some Solana because they need it for fees, and they don't even sort of get to the Bitcoin point. So,
yeah.
Obviously, I'm not going to say I have like tons of evidence for this, but I do think those are two very different audiences, obviously with some overlap, and so I don't know if it will be such a clear rotation. If anything, you're more looking at sort of smaller rotations now, as perhaps, let's say people make a lot of money on pump.farm, maybe they rotate that into Solana. Like maybe, I think I'd be more interested in looking at smaller ones right now, rather than maybe people rotating from pump.farm winnings to Bitcoin, maybe, but we'll see.
No, I think it's an interesting thing, and obviously very different than the last cycle too. Just kind of giving a shout out to the blocks data right now. We're looking at a chart of the Bitcoin dominance and how that's kind of increased since the beginning of the year. And obviously ETFs coming in, you could also make a similar case that if you're owning Bitcoin through an ETF, you're probably not going to ever touch the rest of crypto because it's just sitting there in a BlackRock ETF rather than actually getting your hands dirty with the wallet and everything like that. But I don't know. It's been a very interesting year to see other projects kind of pop up and try and, weave these together. We were just chatting with Stacks and the idea of completely skipping the Ethereum ecosystem, going straight to Solana. Everything's happening. I think it's going to be interesting, and obviously excited to be chatting with some of these project leads out at y'all's conference in Prague. Thank you guys for coming on. I think this was fun. We got to have you back on and maybe do another one of these Monday recaps, and maybe perhaps we can have you on with more data and takeaways. But appreciate you both for hopping on, George and Tim from the block. Thanks, guys.
Thanks
so much.
Appreciate it. We'll see you out in Prague, too. If you haven't yet, check it out. Emergence conference coming up in the beginning of December. And that's pretty much everything we had here on Coinage today, folks. Wanted to give one last shout out to kind of the rest of the idea of wrapping up our end to the year in the bracket. We'll give one more shout out to that. If you haven't yet filled one out, you can go to coinage.media to do so. The ones who get it most correct will be splitting a pot of 1/4 of an ETH. So if you haven't done that yet, get ready to do that. Today's the last day to do it. And then get ready to vote in terms of crowning an eventual champion in our Crypto Project of the Year competition. Our thanks to George. Our thanks to Tim. For everybody here at Coinage, I'm Zach Guzman. Thanks again for joining us. You can catch the biggest headlines around Web3 at coinage.media. We'll see you again soon.